The first time Maren Bellwether asked me to stay for dinner, I was on my knees under her kitchen sink with a flashlight between my teeth, one elbow in a puddle, and a 7-year-old girl standing behind me like she was supervising a city inspection. Not exactly the kind of scene a man imagines when he realizes he may be in real trouble over the woman across the hall. It was 9:38 on a Thursday night in an old brick apartment building in Pittsburgh where every pipe had an opinion and every floorboard knew your business. I had just gotten home from a long day installing walnut cabinets in a kitchen owned by a couple who argued for 40 minutes about drawer handles, and all I wanted was a shower, a sandwich, and maybe enough silence to remember I was a human being. Then someone knocked on my door 3 times, fast but not panicked, the way proud people knock when they are trying not to need you. When I opened it, Maren stood there in faded joggers, an oversized hospital sweatshirt, and wet socks, holding a mixing bowl under one arm like a shield. Her hair was pulled back badly, the kind of ponytail made with no mirror and no patience, and there was a streak of something that looked like flour on her cheek. She looked exhausted, embarrassed, and unfairly pretty in a way that made me immediately stare at the broken hinge on my own doorframe because doorframes had never complicated anyone's life. She said she was sorry to bother me, which was a lie because Maren hated bothering anyone so much that she usually turned favors into formal business transactions. In the years since she and her daughter moved into 3B, I had watched her carry grocery bags up 3 flights with a backpack on one shoulder, a sleepy child on the other side, and the expression of a woman who would rather chew glass than ask a man to grab the milk. We had been friendly in the way neighbors get friendly when they both know there is something there, but neither one is foolish enough to name it. She had borrowed my ladder once and returned it with banana bread. I had fixed the loose strike plate on her door because she mentioned it in passing, and she left a thank you note taped to my mailbox that said, "You are annoying but useful," which I kept in a junk drawer like a normal, emotionally stable adult. But that night, she was standing in front of me with water spreading across the toes of her socks, and when I asked what happened, she looked me dead in the eye and said her sink had decided to reenact a natural disaster. I grabbed my tool bag without asking anything else. That was the problem with me. Give me a broken thing, and I knew exactly what to do. Give me a woman like Maren looking at me like she was trying not to trust me, and I became extremely interested in plumbing. Her apartment was warm, bright, and chaotic in a way mine never was. Mine had clean counters, stacked lumber samples, unpaid invoices, and one lonely chair at a table I mostly used for sanding drawings and takeout receipts. Maren's kitchen had a spelling test on the fridge, a half-cut onion on the counter, a pot of pasta water that had clearly given up, and a towel dam built across the floor with the desperation of a losing army. Hollis, her daughter, stood near the refrigerator in purple pajamas and mismatched socks, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She had Maren's sharp eyes and none of Maren's social caution, which made her dangerous immediately. When I crouched to open the cabinet under the sink, Hollis asked if I was a real repairman or just the guy from across the hall who owned too many hammers. I told her both things could be true, and she considered that with the seriousness of a judge before saying that her mom said I was good with my hands. Maren made a sound behind me that might have been a cough, or a prayer, or a woman wishing the floor would open. I pretended not to hear it because I was a gentleman, and also because I almost hit my head on the pipe. The leak was not dramatic once I found it, just a loosened slip nut and a tired washer, the kind of small failure that looks like disaster when it happens at the wrong hour to the wrong person. Maren hovered at first, trying to mop around me, apologize around me, and manage the entire room like my presence had become one more thing she needed to organize. I finally told her that if she moved one more towel, I was going to invoice her for emotional turbulence. She looked at me for half a second, then laughed. It was not a big laugh. It was tired, surprised, and gone almost as soon as it arrived, but it changed the room anyway. Hollis climbed onto a chair and announced that her mom had not laughed all day because a kid at the hospital threw up on her shoe, which made Maren close her eyes and whisper that patient confidentiality apparently did not apply at home. I tightened the fitting, replaced the washer from the little box I kept in my bag, and ran the water until the pipes behaved. When I looked up, Maren was leaning against the counter with both hands wrapped around a dish towel, watching me like I had done something larger than stop a leak. That look bothered me. Not because I disliked it, because I liked it too much. I dried my hands and told her it should hold, but she ought to call the landlord in the morning and ask for a proper replacement before the old trap gave out for real. She nodded too quickly and said, of course, yes, absolutely, she would handle it, because handling things was apparently her native language. Then I started packing my tools. That was my move. Fix the thing, make one dry joke, leave before anyone could mistake me for more than help. I had learned that lesson the hard way from a woman who once told me I was reliable but not exciting, which sounds polite until you realize polite words can still skin you. Since then, I had become very careful about being useful only in ways that had clear exits. Maren watched me close the tool bag, and for a second I thought she was going to say thank you again, maybe offer banana bread she did not have, maybe promise to pay me in a tone that made both of us feel safer. Instead, she looked at the pot on the stove, the rescued box of pasta, the little girl still studying me from the chair, and then back at me. Her voice was quiet when she said I should stay for dinner. I actually looked behind me, which was not my proudest moment, as if there might be another man standing in her flooded kitchen who had earned that invitation. Maren noticed. Of course, she noticed everything. A small smile touched her mouth, nervous at the edges, and she said she meant me unless I planned on sending the wrench in my place. I told her she did not have to feed me for tightening a pipe, and her face changed just enough that I wished I had answered differently. Not hurt, exactly. More like she had opened a door 2 inches and I had immediately pointed out the hinges. She said she knew she did not have to, then added that she was asking because she made too much food, because Hollis would eat better if another adult sat down, and because maybe she did not want to eat standing over the sink tonight. The last part came out softer than the others. That was the part that got me. Not the food, not the pretty woman in the kitchen, not the warm smell of onions starting over in butter. It was the way she admitted she wanted company and looked almost ashamed of it. So I stayed. I washed my hands at the sink I had just fixed, which felt oddly intimate for reasons I did not want to examine, and Maren told Hollis to set 3 places. Hollis looked at me while she placed a fork beside the chipped blue plate and asked if I liked buttered noodles or if I was one of those adults who pretended to like salad. I said buttered noodles had kept civilization alive, and she nodded like I had passed the first round. Maren turned toward the stove, but not before I saw her smile down at the pasta, like she was trying to hide it from both of us. I sat at their little kitchen table with my work shirt still damp at the cuffs, my tool bag by the door, and my heart acting like an idiot over a meal that came from a box. Across from me, Hollis folded her hands, narrowed her eyes, and stared like she had questions no one had warned me about. That was when I realized fixing the sink had been the easy part. Dinner was buttered noodles, reheated chicken, sliced apples, and the kind of tired little salad that had clearly been assembled out of guilt rather than desire. It should not have felt like anything important. I had eaten in nicer places. I had installed kitchens in houses where the island cost more than my truck. I had once dated a woman who believed dinner was not dinner unless someone described the wine as earthy. But there I was at Maren Bellwether's small kitchen table, eating noodles from a chipped blue plate while her daughter explained the social politics of second grade, and I felt more aware of my own hands than I had in years. Maren sat across from me at first, but even seated she kept half rising every few minutes to get napkins, refill water, check the stove, wipe a spot on the counter that did not need wiping. It was like her body had forgotten how to be served by a room instead of responsible for it. Hollis finally told her, with the authority only children have, that if she got up again before eating 5 bites, she was going to tell Grandma. Maren froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, then looked at me and said motherhood was mostly living under surveillance. I told her it sounded like a hostile workplace, and Hollis nodded gravely while Maren tried not to laugh with noodles in her mouth. I learned 3 things during that dinner. Hollis hated peas, but respected them as a concept. Maren worked nights in the pediatric wing because, according to her, children were better patients than adults and worse liars. And I was apparently incapable of not watching the way Maren softened when her daughter talked. She had this tired, guarded beauty when she opened the door, the kind that made a man careful. But at the table, when Hollis leaned into her side or asked if clouds got embarrassed when they rained, Maren changed. The sharp edges did not disappear. They rested. She listened like every strange little question deserved a real answer. She cut chicken into smaller pieces without interrupting the story about a classroom hamster named Biscuit. She noticed when Hollis pushed food around instead of eating, noticed when I reached for a napkin before I asked, noticed everything except, maybe, the way I was noticing her. Or maybe she noticed that too and was kind enough not to punish me for it. When dinner ended, I stood too quickly and reached for my plate because leaving was easier if I had a task. Maren told me I did not have to clean up, which made both of us pause, because we had apparently reached the part of the evening where every ordinary sentence had a second meaning hiding inside it. I said I knew I did not have to, and she looked down at the table with a small smile, like I had given back her own words and she had not expected me to remember them. Hollis handed me her plate without ceremony and asked if I lived alone because I was bad at sharing or because nobody had asked nicely. Maren made a strangled sound and said my personal life was not dinner conversation, but Hollis only shrugged and said she was collecting information. I told her I lived alone because my furniture had strong opinions, and most people found that intimidating. She accepted that, then asked if my apartment had snacks. I said yes. She asked what kind. I said pretzels, coffee, and emergency cereal. She looked at Maren and whispered that I needed help. After the dishes were stacked and the floor had mostly dried, I finally picked up my tool bag. The apartment seemed quieter then. Hollis had been sent to brush her teeth, though she kept appearing in the hallway with urgent updates about toothpaste foam and whether adults knew sea otters held hands. Maren walked me to the door even though the door was 6 steps away. She thanked me again, but this time it did not sound like payment. It sounded like she was trying to say something else and had chosen the safest available word. I told her she was welcome, then added that the sink might groan a little in the morning but should not flood unless the building itself wanted revenge. She smiled, tired and real, and for 1 second, neither of us moved. There was pasta on her sleeve. My cuffs were still damp. Hollis was humming badly from the bathroom. Nothing about it was romantic in the way people describe romance, and somehow that made it worse. Back in my apartment, the silence felt staged. My chair looked lonelier than usual. My sandwich sat untouched in the fridge, suddenly pathetic compared to boxed noodles at a table where a child interrogated me like a federal witness. I washed my hands again, even though they were already clean, then found myself opening the junk drawer and looking at the thank you note Maren had left months earlier. You are annoying, but useful. I had liked the useful part then because useful was a safe word. Useful had rules. Useful had an ending. But that night, sitting alone with the sounds of their apartment faint through the wall, I wondered if she had asked me to stay because I was useful, or because for 1 tired minute she had wanted me there after the usefulness was done. For the next few days, we went back to normal, except normal had been ruined. Maren passed me in the hall with a laundry basket balanced against her hip and asked if my furniture was still intimidating. I asked if her sink was still dramatic. She said it had calmed down but was seeking therapy. Hollis waved at me with a granola bar in her mouth and asked if I had bought better snacks yet. Every little exchange should have been harmless, but each one carried the memory of that third place at the table. Then, on Sunday evening, I came upstairs with sawdust still on my boots and found Maren unlocking her door while Hollis sat on the hallway floor coloring. Hollis looked up before Maren did and said, very casually, that they were having grilled cheese tonight and asked if I was coming for dinner again. Maren went perfectly still with the key in the lock, and I realized she had not invited me out loud. Maren's hand stayed on the key for so long I almost pretended not to hear the question. That would have been the easy thing, and I was excellent at easy exits when they looked like politeness. Hollis kept coloring on the hallway floor like she had not just thrown a match into a room full of dry wood. Maren finally turned her head and looked at me with an expression I could not read fast enough. Embarrassment was there, but so was something smaller and more dangerous. Something like hope, trying to act casual. I told Hollis that grilled cheese depended heavily on professional standards, and she asked if I had any. Maren let out a breath that was almost a laugh, then said I could come if I wanted, but only if I understood that dinner in 3B was not a restaurant and no one would be impressed by anything except proper tomato soup dipping technique. I should have said I had work. I should have said maybe next time. Instead, I said I would wash the sawdust off my hands and be there in 10 minutes, and Maren looked away so quickly that I knew she was smiling. That second dinner became a third because Hollis claimed I still needed snack supervision, and the third became a thing none of us named because naming it would have made it fragile. I did not come every night. Maren would not have allowed that, and honestly, neither would I. But twice a week turned into a rhythm, a knock on the wall, a text that said too much pasta again, or Hollis appearing at my door with a serious face and a message from the committee. I fixed the cabinet hinge that screamed every time Maren opened it at 6 in the morning. I replaced a loose drawer pull. I brought over a loaf of bread from the bakery near my workshop because Maren once mentioned that hospital cafeteria toast tasted like drywall with ambition. Every practical thing I did had a reason, but the reasons started getting thinner. A man can only pretend he needs to check a sink so many times before even a 7-year-old starts looking at him like he is insulting her intelligence. Hollis was the first person in that apartment who treated my presence like it made sense. She asked me to show her how wood got smooth, so I brought a scrap of maple from the shop and a sanding block small enough for her hand. Maren watched from the stove while Hollis dragged the block over the wood with fierce concentration, then held it up like she had personally invented furniture. I told her patience mattered more than force, which made Maren glance at me in a way that landed somewhere under my ribs. Later, when Hollis went to wash up, Maren touched the maple scrap with one finger and said I was good at making broken or rough things feel safe to touch. I tried to joke that cabinet makers loved being emotionally compared to sandpaper, but she did not laugh right away. She just looked at me, tired eyes soft, and said she meant it. That was Maren's way of stepping closer. She did not make speeches. She handed you one honest sentence and waited to see if you would run from it. The kitchen table became the place where my defenses kept losing small battles. Maren would come home from a night shift with her badge still clipped to her sweatshirt and that particular quiet nurses get when they have held too much fear for other people. She never told me patient details. She did not have to. I could read the weight in the way she stirred soup without tasting it, or stood too long in front of the fridge as if cold air might organize her thoughts. On those nights, Hollis would chatter enough for all three of us, and I would take over something simple, buttering toast, pouring milk, cleaning a pan before Maren noticed. At first, she resisted. Then one night, she placed a wooden spoon in my hand without comment and let her shoulder brush mine as she passed. It was barely anything. I thought about it for 2 days. Of course, the building noticed before we did. Lenora Pike from downstairs caught me carrying a bag of groceries into Maren's apartment one Tuesday and lifted both eyebrows so high they nearly joined her hairline. Lenora was 72, 5 feet tall, and powered entirely by black coffee and suspicion. She asked if my lease had been amended to include 3B, and I told her I was providing emergency bread support. She said bread had ruined better men than me, then looked past me at Maren in the doorway and smiled like she had already written the ending. Maren turned pink, which made Lenora's smile worse. After she shuffled away, Maren muttered that old buildings should come with privacy curtains for hallways. I said Lenora would only cut eye holes in them. Maren laughed, then stood there holding the grocery bag between us like it was the only thing keeping her from saying something honest. The night things shifted for real, Hollis fell asleep early on the couch after declaring she was not tired with the conviction of a doomed soldier. Maren and I cleaned the kitchen quietly, moving around each other with the strange ease of people who had done it for years instead of weeks. The apartment had settled into that late-night hush where the refrigerator hummed, the radiator clicked, and the city outside sounded far away. Maren leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching me dry the last plate. I asked if I had soap on my face because she was staring, and she said no, she was just thinking. That was not reassuring. When I asked what about, she looked toward the living room where Hollis slept with one sock half off, then back at me. She said the quiet after bedtime used to be the hardest part of her day because that was when there was no one left to perform for and no noise left to hide behind. I set the towel down slowly. She smiled like she regretted saying it, but she did not take it back. I told her she did not have to perform for me. Maren looked at me for a long moment, then said that was exactly the problem, because with me she kept forgetting to pretend she was fine. There are compliments that feel like gifts, and there are compliments that feel like someone has found the locked room in you and turned the handle. That one did both. I wanted to touch her then, Not dramatically, not even romantically in the way people imagine. I wanted to put my hand over hers on the counter and let her know she was not alone in that quiet. But Hollis stirred on the couch, and Maren looked away first, gathering herself with the skill of a woman who had survived by never needing too much. I picked up my tool bag even though I had not brought tools that night, because apparently I needed a prop to leave. At the door, Maren almost said something. I watched the words rise and stop behind her eyes. Then she gave me a small, brave smile and said, "You make this place feel less heavy." For 3 days after Maren told me I made her place feel less heavy, I became very invested in acting normal, which meant I was absolutely not normal. I sanded the same cabinet door twice at the shop because my mind kept returning to her doorway, to the way her voice had gone soft on the word heavy, to the strange ache of wanting to be the person she did not have to perform for. Men like me can build entire rooms out of denial if given enough lumber. I told myself she was tired, that I was convenient, that single mothers said vulnerable things sometimes because exhaustion loosened the bolts on a person's better judgment. Then Thursday evening came, and with it came a knock from Hollis, who stood in my doorway wearing a sparkly headband, and announced that the committee required my presence because spaghetti was happening and her mom had burned the garlic bread in a way that might be educational. I followed her across the hall with a bottle of seltzer and the kind of stupid hope a grown man should be embarrassed to carry. Maren was at the stove in dark jeans and a soft blue sweater, hair loose, cheeks flushed from heat or chaos, and when she saw me, her whole face changed before she remembered to hide it. Dinner should have been easy by then, but it had started to feel like standing near a fire and pretending not to be warm. Hollis talked about a class project involving planets. Maren teased me for cutting spaghetti with the side of my fork like a man raised by wolves, and I tried not to react when Maren reached past me for the Parmesan, and her arm brushed mine. After Hollis went to the living room to finish coloring Jupiter purple for creative reasons, Maren and I stood at the sink together, the repaired sink, the beginning of this ridiculous, dangerous rhythm. She washed, I dried, and neither of us commented on how our shoulders kept touching when there was plenty of room. I was considering saying something brave, or at least something less cowardly than "hand me the saucepan," when someone knocked on the door. Not Hollis's knock, not Lenora's bony little tap, but 2 firm raps from a man who expected doors to open. Maren went still so quickly I felt it before I understood it. She dried her hands on a towel and walked to the door with her back too straight. When she opened it, Troy Voss filled the frame like he had been rehearsing the entrance. He was good-looking in a polished, expensive jacket way, with clean shoes, a trimmed beard, and the easy confidence of a man who believed charm was a legal document. Hollis shouted "Dad" from the living room, surprised more than excited, and that told me enough. Troy smiled at her, then at Maren, then looked past both of them and landed on me with interest that was not friendly. Maren said she thought he was picking Hollis up Saturday morning, and Troy replied that he was in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off a book she left at his place. He held up a paperback like proof of innocence. Then he looked at the dish towel in my hand and said, lightly, that he hoped he was not interrupting maintenance. I have been called worse things than maintenance, most of them by customers with bad taste in stain color. But the way Troy said it made the room shrink around Maren. She introduced me as Bram from across the hall, and I hated how little that sounded like compared to the weight of the last few weeks. Troy shook my hand with the measured pressure of a man taking inventory. He said Maren had always been lucky at finding helpful men, then smiled as if the sentence had no blade in it. Maren's jaw tightened. Hollis came over and hugged his waist, and he performed fatherhood well enough for an audience, asking about school, touching her head, promising ice cream Saturday if she behaved. I watched Maren watch him, and I saw something I had not seen before. Not longing, not anger exactly, but the exhaustion of a woman bracing for a familiar weather pattern. When Troy finally left, he told Maren they should talk soon about boundaries, and his glance flicked toward me when he said it. The apartment did not recover after he was gone. Hollis went back to Jupiter, but quieter this time. Maren began stacking plates that were already stacked. I asked if she wanted me to leave, and she said no, so fast that my chest hurt. Then she looked at Hollis and lowered her voice, telling me she just needed a minute. I waited until Hollis was in the bath, singing nonsense to herself through the door, before Maren finally leaned against the counter and pressed both hands over her face. She said Troy had a gift for making her feel like every need she had was evidence against her. When they were together, he treated her long shifts like inconveniences, her tiredness like moodiness, and motherhood like a condition he was generously tolerating. She said that after they split, she promised herself she would never again let a man walk into her life and make her feel like she had to earn basic kindness. I told her she should not have had to earn it the first time, and she looked at me then with wet eyes and a small, wrecked smile. Maybe that was why I told her the truth about my ex. Not the polished version, not the one where I made myself sound mature. I told Maren that the woman I almost married had called me safe and kind, like she was giving a positive review of a used appliance, then said I was not enough to build a life around. I told her I had spent years making usefulness into a personality because, at least, useful men had a reason to be invited inside. Maren listened without interrupting. She came closer while I talked, slowly, like she was approaching something wounded that might bolt. When I finished, she said my name with no joke inside it. Then she told me I had misunderstood something important. She said I was not in her kitchen because the sink broke, or because Hollis liked my emergency cereal, or because she needed another pair of hands. Her voice shook when she said I was the first man in years whose presence felt like relief instead of another task. I could have handled almost anything better than that. Insults, maybe. Rejection, definitely. But relief undid me because I knew what it cost her to say it. I set the towel down, and she stepped close enough that I could see the faint shadow under her eyes and the tiny scar near her thumb where she had once burned herself on a hospital coffee machine. She whispered that when I was there, she did not feel like she had to hold up the ceiling alone. I told her I did not want to be another thing she had to manage, and she answered that I was the one thing she did not have to manage. Her hand touched my forearm, light and uncertain. I looked down at it, then back at her, and for a second the whole apartment seemed to pause around us. Maren's mouth parted like she was about to say my name again, and I leaned closer before I had fully decided to move. Then the bathroom door opened, and Hollis yelled that Jupiter had fallen into the tub. Maren jerked back with a breathless laugh that was half panic, half heartbreak, and I stepped away so quickly I nearly knocked over a chair. The moment broke, but it did not disappear. It stayed in the room with us while Maren rescued a wet purple planet from bathwater, while I gathered plates, while Hollis asked why grown-ups looked weird. I left 10 minutes later because I did not trust myself to stay and pretend we had not almost crossed a line. I was barely inside my own apartment when my phone buzzed. For one foolish second, I thought it was Maren. It was not. She must have received the message first, because a moment later she knocked once and came in holding her phone, face pale. Troy had written that they needed to discuss who was spending so much time around his daughter. Maren looked up at me, and her voice was quiet enough to hurt. She asked, "If this gets messy, do you leave?" I should have answered Maren clearly. I should have said that messy did not scare me, that Troy did not get to decide who mattered in her apartment, that I was already too far in to pretend this was still just dinners and cabinet hinges. But there are moments when an old wound speaks before the better part of you can stop it. I looked at her, standing in my doorway with that phone in her hand, tired and brave and waiting, and all I could think was that I had become dangerous to the peace she had fought so hard to build. So I said the careful thing. I told her I did not want to make her life harder. I told her Hollis came first, that Troy was still her father, that the last thing Maren needed was another grown man creating complications around her child. None of those things were false, which made them worse. Truth can still be cowardice if you use it to hide the one thing you are afraid to say. Maren listened without interrupting, but I watched her face close one small door at a time. She did not cry. That would have been easier, maybe, because tears give a man something obvious to regret. She just nodded once and said she understood. I hated that word immediately. Understood meant she had translated my caution into rejection and was too proud to ask me to correct her. I tried to explain that I was not leaving, only giving her room, but the sentence sounded weak even to me. Giving her room from across the hall was a ridiculous thing to say when I had spent weeks letting her kitchen table become the best part of my day. Maren glanced back toward her apartment, toward the place where her daughter was probably asleep under a blanket with cartoon moons on it, and said maybe space was smart for a little while. Then she gave me a smile that belonged to polite neighbors, not to the woman who had almost kissed me beside a repaired sink, and went home. The next few days were quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No knock from the committee, no text about too much pasta, no Hollis at my door asking whether pretzels counted as a meal. I still heard them across the hall, of course. Old buildings are cruel like that. I heard Maren's key turn after her night shift. I heard Hollis laughing at something on television. I heard cabinet doors open and close in the kitchen I knew too well for a man who did not live there. I told myself this was better, respectful, mature. All the words men use when they are trying to make fear sound noble. I worked late at the shop, took extra measurements on jobs that did not need them, and came home smelling like sawdust and avoidance. Every time I passed Maren's door, I slowed down without meaning to. Every time I did not knock, I felt like I was proving some honorable point no one had asked me to prove. Hollis broke first, because children have very little patience for adult cowardice. On Wednesday afternoon, I came home early and found her sitting on the hallway floor with a backpack beside her and a juice box in both hands, one full and one empty for reasons I chose not to question. Lenora Pike sat on the stairs below, pretending to read a magazine while clearly guarding her. Hollis looked up and asked if I was mad at them. Just like that. No warning, no soft landing. I crouched in front of her and said no, of course not, and she asked why I did not come over anymore if I was not mad. From below, Lenora made a noise that sounded suspiciously like approval. I told Hollis grown-up situations could get complicated, which was a terrible answer, and we both knew it. She studied me for a long second, then said her mom got quiet when people left but pretended she liked quiet because that was easier than asking them to stay. I did not know what to say to that. There was no useful version of me available. No wrench, no washer, no piece of maple to sand smooth. Just a man crouched in a hallway being told the truth by a child with apple juice on her sleeve. Maren came up the stairs then, still in scrubs, her hair loose from its tie, exhaustion written all over her shoulders. She stopped when she saw us, and for a moment nobody moved. Hollis stood and grabbed her backpack, suddenly aware she had said more than she was supposed to. Maren thanked Lenora for watching her, then told Hollis to go inside and wash her hands. Hollis obeyed, but not before giving me a look that said the committee remained disappointed. Maren and I were left in the hallway with too much silence between us and Lenora pretending so hard not to listen that she turned a magazine page upside down. Maren asked if Hollis had bothered me. I said no, because she had not bothered me. She had exposed me. Maren's mouth twitched at that, almost a smile, but it faded quickly. She said kids notice changes. I told her adults did too. That made her look at me, really look, and for half a second I saw the hurt she had been keeping organized behind her eyes. She said I did not have to explain again, that she understood I was trying to be decent. I said I was starting to think decent was just the costume I wore when I was scared. Her expression shifted, but before either of us could step into that opening, Troy's car horn sounded from the street below. Maren's face tightened. She said he was taking Hollis for ice cream for an hour, and the way she said it told me there had already been a conversation I had not been part of, one that left her tired before it even happened. Troy came up the stairs wearing that same polished confidence, carrying a stuffed animal Hollis must have left at his place. He greeted Maren warmly enough, nodded at me like I was a chair in the hallway, and told Hollis she looked beautiful when she came out. Hollis hugged Maren twice before leaving, which I noticed, and so did Maren. Troy noticed me noticing and smiled. He said it was good that Maren had neighbors willing to help, especially with her schedule. There was nothing openly cruel in the words, but Maren's shoulders lifted half an inch. I wanted to say something. I wanted to be the kind of man who stepped in without making everything worse. Instead, I stood there while Troy guided Hollis downstairs, and I hated myself for how familiar that silence felt. Useful men wait for permission. Chosen men know when the woman they care about is being made small in front of them. After they left, Maren did not invite me in. I did not blame her. She stood with one hand on her doorframe and said Troy thought boundaries were important now. The now carried years inside it. I said he seemed very interested in boundaries that kept her lonely. She looked at me sharply, and I expected anger, but what I got was worse. Relief, brief and painful, like she had been waiting for someone else to say the obvious out loud. Then she shook her head and said she could handle Troy. I believed her. That was never the question. The question was whether she should always have to. I almost said that. I almost told her I missed dinner, missed Hollis's ridiculous questions, missed the way her kitchen felt at night when nobody was pretending to be fine. But fear got its hand around my throat again, and I only told her to call if she needed anything. Maren's smile turned small. She said that was the problem, Bram. I always call when I need something. She went inside before I could answer. That sentence followed me into my apartment and sat with me all evening. I understood then that I had done exactly what I was afraid of doing. I had made myself available as help and absent as a man. I had told myself I was protecting her from complication, but all I had really done was prove that my presence came with conditions I had never meant to set. Around 9, there was a soft scrape at my door. When I opened it, no one was there. Just a folded piece of construction paper on the floor, weighted down with a purple crayon. Hollis had drawn 3 people at a kitchen table. Maren had long hair and a blue shirt. Hollis had a crown for reasons unknown. The man across from them had a square head, large hands, and a speech bubble that said, "I brought bread." At the bottom, in careful, uneven letters, she had written, "Dinner is better with Bram." I stood in the doorway holding that drawing while the hallway light buzzed overhead. Across the hall, Maren's apartment was quiet. For the first time, I understood that leaving to avoid hurting them had already hurt them. And maybe the bravest thing I could do was not fix anything at all, but knock on the door and admit I wanted a place at that table even when nothing was broken. I did not knock that night. I stood there with Hollis's drawing in my hand for so long the hallway light clicked off, then clicked back on when Lenora Pike opened her door downstairs and asked if I planned to become part of the architecture. I told her no, and she said good, because the building already had enough load-bearing men who did nothing useful. Then she shut her door before I could respond, which was Lenora's way of offering emotional counsel without getting sued for kindness. I went back inside and set Hollis's drawing on my table, propped against a jar of pencils, where it looked at me all night. By morning, I knew 2 things with the kind of clarity that makes a man feel both relieved and stupid. I had not stepped back because Maren needed space. I had stepped back because I was terrified she would eventually decide I was only convenient, and I wanted to leave first enough that I could call it honor. The chance to stop being a coward came sooner than I expected. Saturday afternoon, the building held its annual courtyard cleanup, which was less a community event and more Lenora forcing tenants to pull weeds while she judged their life choices from a folding chair. I came down with work gloves and a rake, telling myself I was there because the front planter was a disgrace. Then I saw Maren by the side gate, kneeling beside Hollis as she tied the laces on a pair of bright yellow sneakers. She wore jeans, an old green jacket, and her hair in a loose braid that kept slipping over one shoulder. She looked tired, guarded, beautiful, and very much like a woman who had decided not to look toward my side of the courtyard unless necessary. Hollis saw me first and waved, but even her wave had caution in it now. That hurt more than I deserved. Troy arrived 20 minutes later carrying 2 coffees, neither of which was for Maren. He came through the gate with that polished smile, greeting Lenora like he was running for office in a building he did not live in. Hollis ran to him, because children can love people who disappoint them in ways adults forget how to understand. Maren stood, wiping dirt from her hands. Troy said he thought he would stop by and help, since he wanted to show he could be more present. Lenora muttered that presence usually required bringing your own gloves, but Troy did not hear or pretended not to. He looked around the courtyard, then at me fixing a loose board on the raised planter, and smiled like the universe had handed him a script. He said it was nice Maren had a handyman so close, especially with all the little emergencies single mothers seemed to attract. I felt the old version of myself reach for silence. It was right there, familiar and smooth. Let Maren handle it. Do not make a scene. Do not add pressure. Be useful, not difficult. Then I saw Maren's fingers tighten around the garden trowel, saw her face go calm in that terrible practiced way, and I remembered her saying she could handle Troy. She could. She had been handling him for years. That did not mean she should have to stand alone while he made her life sound like a list of problems someone else was generous enough to tolerate. Before I could talk myself out of it, I set the screwdriver down and said Maren did not attract emergencies. She survived people who called ordinary needs emergencies because it made them feel less guilty for not showing up. The courtyard went quiet in a way only nosy neighbors can manage. Maren turned toward me, eyes wide. Troy laughed once, short and disbelieving, and said I seemed pretty invested for a neighbor. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, but for once, I did not hide behind a joke. I told him he was right. I was invested. Not because Maren needed someone to fix her sink, not because Hollis liked my bread, and not because I was confused about my place. I looked at Maren when I said the next part, because she was the only person there who mattered. I said I had pulled back because I thought wanting a place in her life would make me selfish, but all it did was make me dishonest. Maren's mouth parted slightly, and something in her face broke open. Not dramatically, not for the crowd, just enough for me to see she had been waiting to find out whether I would say it where other people could hear. Troy said her life was complicated, and I should be careful about confusing dinner with family. That one landed because it was exactly the fear I had been carrying. But before I could answer, Maren did. She stepped between us, not to protect me, not to calm things down, but because she had decided she was done letting men narrate her choices. Her voice was steady when she said dinner was not the confusing part. Convenience was easy. Convenience did not make her save the good bowl of soup in case I came home late. Convenience did not make her listen for my boots on the stairs after a long shift. Convenience did not make her daughter draw a third chair at the table and look sad when it stayed empty. Then she turned fully toward me, and the courtyard, Troy, Lenora, the weeds, all of it blurred around the edges. Maren said I was not a substitute, not a repairman, not a safe option she was settling for because life was hard. She said, "You are the first man I have wanted near us when nothing is broken." That sentence took the ground out from under me. I crossed to her slowly, because some part of me still needed to give her every chance to step away. She did not. She met me halfway beside the raised planter with dirt on her knees and sunlight caught in her braid, and when I said her name, it came out rougher than I meant. I told her I wanted to stay, not as help she called when something leaked, not as a shadow across the hall, but as the man who showed up because he loved her and knew love was not useful unless it was honest. Her eyes filled, but her smile came first. She said she loved me too, and then she kissed me in front of the whole courtyard before I could ask permission in a way that would have made both of us laugh later. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not polished. My glove was still on one hand, someone's rake fell over behind us, and Lenora said finally in a tone loud enough to qualify as community feedback. But Maren's hands were on my chest, and mine were careful at her waist, and for the first time since I had met her, I let myself believe that being wanted could feel steady instead of temporary. Hollis made a delighted sound somewhere nearby, then immediately asked if this meant I was coming for dinner again. Maren laughed against my shoulder, wiping her eyes with the back of her wrist. I thought the hardest part had passed. Then she took my hand in front of everyone, squeezed it once, and said we should go upstairs soon because we still needed to talk about what staying actually meant. We did not go upstairs like people escaping into a fantasy. We went upstairs like two adults who had just said something beautiful in public and now had to decide whether they were brave enough to live it in private. Hollis ran ahead of us, still vibrating with joy, and Maren squeezed my hand before we reached her door as if reminding both of us that the kiss had been real, but so was everything waiting inside. Her apartment looked the same as it always had. Shoes by the entry, a school flyer on the counter, one mug in the sink, the repaired cabinet hinge catching the afternoon light. But it felt different because I was not standing there with a tool bag or an excuse. I was standing there because Maren had chosen me, and for once I was trying not to turn that into a job. Maren sent Hollis to wash her hands and change out of her muddy sneakers, which gave us about 90 seconds alone in the kitchen. I wanted to kiss her again. I also wanted to apologize for every silent hallway, every time I had treated my fear like respect, every dinner I had missed because I was too afraid to ask for the chair that had already been pulled out for me. Maren leaned against the counter, studying me with those tired, steady eyes, and told me softly that she did not need me to become instant family just because we had finally stopped lying to ourselves. That sentence settled something in me. I told her I did not want to rush into Hollis's life like a man claiming space he had not earned, but I also did not want to drift in and out as the neighbor who appeared only when pipes failed or feelings got dramatic. I wanted to be consistent. I wanted to be honest. I wanted to build slowly, properly, in a way a child could trust. Maren's face changed at that word. Trust. She looked toward the hallway where Hollis was singing to herself, then back at me, and said that was what scared her most. Not Troy, not gossip, not Lenora's eyebrows, though those were powerful forces. What scared her was that Hollis already trusted me, and Maren did too, and if I left later, it would not just be romance that broke. I stepped closer, but not too close, because that conversation deserved room to breathe. I told her I could not promise never to make mistakes, and I would not insult her by pretending love made me perfect. But I could promise I would not disappear to make myself feel noble. I could promise that if I got scared, I would say so before turning into a ghost across the hall. Maren blinked hard and said that might be the most romantic thing anyone had ever said in her kitchen, which was a low bar because the sink had once screamed at her. I told her I respected the sink's emotional range, and she laughed with tears in her eyes. That night, dinner was grilled cheese and tomato soup because Hollis declared celebrations needed dipping. I cut the sandwiches into triangles because apparently rectangles were for regular days, and Maren stood beside me at the stove, close enough that our shoulders touched without either of us pretending it was accidental. Hollis watched us from the table with the pleased suspicion of someone who had engineered world peace through persistence. At one point, she asked if I was her mom's boyfriend now, and Maren nearly dropped the ladle. I looked at Maren first, because no answer mattered unless we shared it. She gave me a small nod, shy and certain, so I told Hollis I hoped so, if her mom agreed and if Hollis understood that boyfriend did not mean boss, dad, or automatic pancake authority. Hollis considered this seriously, then said pancake authority could be negotiated. Troy did not vanish from the story after that. Real life is not that generous. There were still schedules, tense messages, awkward pickups, and moments when Maren had to remind him that her home was not a committee he chaired. But something had shifted. She stopped explaining my presence like it needed a permit. I stopped waiting for emergencies to prove I belonged. Some nights I still ate alone in my apartment because slow meant slow, and we meant that. Other nights, Maren texted 2 words, too much pasta. I would cross the hall with bread under my arm, and Hollis would shout that the committee approved, and Maren would look at me from the stove with that soft, private expression that made every old insult lose a little more power. Months later, the sink finally gave out for real. Not a small leak this time, but a full surrender. Maren called the landlord, then called me, not because she needed me to rescue her, but because she knew I would want to laugh with her while water ran into a bucket and Hollis taped a sign to the cabinet that said, "Do not trust." We ordered pizza on the floor while the kitchen dried, and Maren leaned against my side like she had been doing it for years. I looked at that table, the same one where I had once sat damp-cuffed and terrified of wanting too much, and understood that love had not arrived as lightning. It had arrived as dinner, as a fixed hinge, as a child's drawing under a hallway light, as a woman brave enough to ask me to stay, and a man finally brave enough not to leave. So when people ask when Maren and I really began, I do not say the courtyard kiss, or the first confession, or even the night she asked me to fix her sink. I say it began when she looked at a tired, useful man standing in her kitchen and offered him a chair after the work was done. Because sometimes the most dangerous invitation is not, "Come save me." Sometimes it is, "Stay for dinner." And sometimes dinner starts to feel like home. Have you ever seen a simple act of help turn into something deeper than either person expected? Tell me in the comments whether Bram should have knocked sooner, or whether Maren needed to be the one to choose him out loud. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.